Upon taking my first steps into Gravesite Plain, I made the following note in the little journal that I keep by my side when playing something that I'll be talking about here on YouTube. Bitterness fills the air. A scorched town lies hidden beneath black drapes, an echo of the funerary veils that hang from the bleeding tree that dominates the horizon. This town is anonymized, hidden, covered up. This entire place is a shame, an embarrassment, a stain on the Golden Order. From the very first moments of Shadow of the Erdtree, From Software's jaw-dropping environment art is communicating with you. I hesitate to call this environmental storytelling, firstly because I think we get very Bethesda-brained about that phrase, like it only refers to a skeleton reading Grognak the Barbarian on the toilet, but also because what's happening here feels more like curation. Before you ever read an item description, the Land of Shadow is telling you its story through vistas and landmarks. And I know that the DLC is doing this because my first impressions were right. The ideas that the game conveyed through this environmental curation are further detailed and confirmed by the written lore. Having read all of the item descriptions, because I'm a huge nerd, I can say with 100% confidence that the Land of Shadow is the shame and the embarrassment of Marika's Golden Order. It is the drain around which the things most detested by the God Queen circle. It's a cover thrown over a bloody history that she'd rather remain forgotten. The immortal head of a perfect order cannot be tarnished by a humble past. Power must maintain an air of unassailability so that its right to enforce order remains unquestioned. A forever war rages in the Land of Shadow, at Marika's behest. Her large adult son, Mesmer, wreaks a terrible vengeance on the Hornsent, a people indigenous to this place who did Marika and her kin an unforgivable wrong. The Hornsent worship at the altar of the Crucible, a primeval font of life energy in the Lands Between, and are the precursors to the Omenkin of Marika's time. Despite the fog of war and death that hangs over the Land of Shadows, though, it is also a place of birth and of beginnings. The Fingers, envoys of an inscrutable god from beyond the stars, hail from this place. This is where Marika's people, the Numen, first arrived in the Lands Between from their home far away. The Erdtree, the Golden Order, and even Marika's very divinity were all born here. This is where she split life from death, where the Golden Order fell about the Lands Between like a constricting net. And so, to Marika and her Golden Order, the Land of Shadows is a necessary embarrassment, an important shame. Ultimately, Elden Ring's DLC is all about power, about the cost of wielding it and what it means to uphold it. It's about death and life and cycles of violence, about a dynasty with humble beginnings and an ignoble end. It's about sin, begetting sin, begetting sin. Over the next few months, I'll be doing a series of videos about Elden Ring and power, with this first one focusing on Marika, her origins, and how power itself is what enables evil. Today, I'll pick through the remains of a world that has buckled under the weight of an imposed, artificial order, and mourn the death of an evil civilization. This is not a lore video. When I say this isn't a lore video, I do genuinely mean that. Not in the traditional sense, at least. While I will be picking apart the story of the DLC, I wanted to do that without heavily referencing item descriptions and without focusing too much on the mechanical how of the world. What I'll be doing instead is using the environmental storytelling and imagery of the expansion to explore the story's themes and mood, as well as to dive into its characters. I want you to come away from this video feeling the story more strongly, instead of just knowing exactly how the magic works or having heard a more precise chronology of the history of the Lands Between. The reason I've done things this way, firstly, is that I didn't feel like the granular detail that I picked up from the item descriptions contributed as much to my investment in the DLC's plot as its mood, music, and general gestalt vibe did. And what's the point in me reading you off item descriptions that I didn't always connect with? I didn't always care so much about litigating the minutiae of the world that way. And I think as a creator it would be rude of me to expect you to care about that if I didn't. I think I owe it to you guys, in a way, to put in the effort to articulate what did resonate with me, even if that constitutes a little bit more work. And more words. Oh my god, this video took a really long time to write.
Like and subscribe.
Secondly, as I've talked about before on the channel, I think a kind of philosophy of lore hunting has sprung up around these games that kind of stifles the ways that we can talk about them. Whew, that's a really long sentence. I think a philosophy of lore hunting has sprung up around these games that kind of stifles the ways that we can talk about them by virtue of focusing too heavily on decoding item descriptions for immutable truths. This tweet from Austin Walker succinctly sums up a lot of my problems with how we talk about From's games, and I talk more in depth about the same stuff in the Dark Souls 3 video I made back in January. The link to that one is in the description if you want to hear me warble about that stuff through a chest infection for 25 minutes. Besides all of that though, the impression that I got from the Land of Shadow was that instead of a Rubik's Cube to be solved, I was supposed to be looking at it as an art gallery, which was easy. Just look at it. Bask in the glory of the Shadow Tree, baby, wee! The different regions and locations are like exhibitions in a museum. They're each deliberately curated and laid out. We're encouraged to explore them. It's like the game is begging us to interact with them, to figure out what we think and we feel about them and the stories that they're trying to tell us. Now, I still don't know whether Marika's journey is the best place to begin illustrating all of this pretentious garbage I've been talking about, but it's where I want to start, as near the beginning as I can. And where it began was in a meadow filled with wildflowers, in a quaint village where a woman called Marika lived. Maybe more than anything else, Elden Ring is the tale of what she left behind, how the leaves that fell in her wake tell a story. In a tiny armoury that maybe used to be a chapel at the foot of Mesmer's Black Tower, a prayer reads, "Have mercy for the spirited away shamans." A statue of Marika looms over this holy space. She stands tall, intimidating, arms outstretched above her as though preaching to a congregation. Correctly prostrating yourself at her feet, and I get the sense that this part was maybe one of Miyazaki's contributions to the story, causes the statue to move aside, revealing a secret tunnel. Rolling hills lay green and speckled with flowers on its other side. Erdtree sentinels patrol those gentle rises on horseback, guarding what must, to them, be an ancient and very sacred place. Cresting the hills, you'll come upon a meadow bathed in warm golden light. As you draw closer, a gentle melody plays, the notes hanging on the unmoving air like dust motes suspended in a sunbeam. The eagle-eared among you might notice that these notes are among the very first sounds you ever heard of Elden Ring, either from the game's announcement trailer back in 2019 or from its main menu. This quiet, simple tune represents Marika. It's her song. It's a softness that gets overridden by grandeur, a humble beginning overshadowed by a violent conclusion. The cacophony of brass and fury that drowns it out is Radagon's music. Music for battle, masculine and overbearing. And just to prove my point, Marika's song doesn't play in the final confrontation with Radagon at the end of the game. Suspended, impaled in the Erdtree, Marika is gone by then. She's been rendered a mere vessel for power, made into an object, her body used by Radagon, and the music of the fight reflects that with her theme's absence. I want to just detour for a second to ask, does Marika deserve that fate? There's definitely something poetic about it in a very Greek tragedy kind of way. Marika spent her life acting as an implement for power, a vessel and a catalyst furthering the interests of a force that she neither knew nor understood. When she tried to rebel against that by shattering the Elden Ring, her true smallness was made clear. By the end of her life, she was being borne along by the historical inertia of her decisions as much as anything else. Her cooperation was barely ever necessary. She remains a vessel for power, even as a petrified, unresponsive corpse. Did the monstrous choices that she made when she still could choose buy this fate? I think that's a question worth bearing in mind as we talk more about Marika's youth, and it's one that the game leaves unanswered for us to ponder. Regardless, this music always implied something about Marika, I think. A gentleness maybe, a sense of faded, nostalgic tragedy that contrasts with the all-powerful god queen she became. It always felt a little out of place next to Radagon's theme, but in the context of this glade, here amidst the stillness, it finally makes sense. This is the place of small beginnings, and it's here that the music belongs. The golden light filling the air radiates from a sapling, standing alone and defiant in the face of the shadow tree, a symbol of death. The golden sapling radiates a gentle, healing blessing, and yet there's nobody left here to be healed. This village has a feeling of smallness. It's beautiful and serene and desperately sad. Beyond the sapling and atop the hill, a woman's likeness is hewn into a twisted, knotted old tree, just as the remembrances of notable figures are now hewn into the Erdtree. She kneels, her arms outstretched in front of her, as though to welcome a child into her embrace. Marika left parts of herself in this place with this carved lady, a braid of her hair, and her restraint. What remains here is her vision for the world, realised in miniature, a world where no one would ever need to suffer, where death was nothing to fear, where she would never have to lose anyone again. Marika wanted to build a place where all wounds could be healed, all wrongs righted. Coming from a character that we know is murderous, brutal, ruthless, genocidal even, it's a disarmingly innocent and naive dream, the whispered wish of someone frightened and alone. Just how did Marika come to be alone, though? We know that she and her people were known as the Newmans, so how did this place come to be called the Shaman Village? And where were those poor shamans spirited away to? Bonny Village is hard to find. It's a well-kept secret within a well-kept secret. It's tucked away on a cliffside below Shadow Altus, the plateau atop which Mesmer's Keep sits. You access the village by travelling through a secret tunnel beneath the ruins of a larger settlement just off Morth Highway, although Bonny Village was obviously never nearly as grand as its sister town. Its dwellings were wooden, its streets overshadowed by oppressive cliffs. Despite being a smaller, hidden offshoot of a larger town, it's still much larger than the Shaman Village, and when I first found it I got angry at Marika for the first time. You see, I arrived here long before I found the Shaman Village, and I thought Bonny Village was a sort of rejoinder to Jarburg, the cosy little hamlet in the base game where these adorable little jar people live. Jarburg is one of the last places in the lands between where life seems to be just going on as best it can, an honest-to-God settlement with these peculiar little fellas just pottering around and minding their own business. While the Jars have some cultural practices that probably seem a little odd to our outside perspective, such as eating the flesh of the valiant dead, their home is peaceful and its inhabitants are friendly. When I found this little place, adorably called Bonny Village, and saw the Jars piled high in shattered mounds, the shades of the dead weeping over them, I was upset. It's an upsetting image, the devastated aftermath of wanton destruction. Why would Marika order this? Why would she have Mesmer commit such an atrocity against a place as peaceful as Jarburg? Unlike the Shaman Village, no one has built a monument to those who suffered here. No golden Erdtree bathes this place in healing light. Bonny Village has instead been completely anonymised, reduced to ash. So why was the pain of those who lived here less worthy of commemoration than that of Marika and her people? What gave Marika the right to do all of this? I'd previously taken a pretty sympathetic stance on Marika as a character, viewing her more as a tragic figure rather than an out-and-out villain. But being confronted by this carnage shook that feeling. Maybe I'd made a mistake, maybe she really was just a one-note bad guy. But what I'd misunderstood most deeply of all was just what Bonny Village really was. Bonny Village was a horn-sent concentration camp, built to house an underclass of criminals and captives raised up like lambs for slaughter. Unlike the jar people of the lands between, the horn-sent had no compunction with filling their jars with the flesh of those still living, in seemingly torturous fashion. On the outskirts of the village stands the Whipping Hut, stark and bleak in the shadow of the jagged peak across the bay. A horn-sent spirit here chastises a long-dead shaman, one of Marika's spirited away kin, telling her that she was only ever accorded life so that she might ascend to sainthood inside one of these jars. The spirit flayed her with a putrid whip, knotted with teeth, and stuffed her into a pot alongside the living flesh of criminals so that she might achieve some sort of closeness to divinity. What a horrific fate, what awful cruelty to inflict in the name of grasping at the divine. With the way this spirit talks, the Hornsent even seemed to believe that they were doing Marika's people some sort of favour by bringing them closer to God in this way. It's gross. Below the village, in the ghoulishly named Bonny Jail, we see what the sainthood promised by the Hornsent really entails. So this hell was where Marika's people were spirited away to, and this horror is what befell them. She was seemingly the only one to escape, and it stands to reason that she fled to the nearby Finger Ruins. It was there that she must have made communion with a god from the black abyss of space who seduced her with a temptation that she couldn't refuse. The means to strike back, a way to build the world she'd envisioned, where nothing could ever be taken from her again. It offered her the power to spread that golden, healing kindness to everyone, and to wreak her vengeance on those who'd wronged her. It offered her a path to godhood. What a sweet revenge it must have been for Marika, to make contact with the greater will, to brandish the Elden Ring from atop the tower of Anira Lim, and to give the devout Hornsent a true close encounter with divinity. She took the Hornsent's supremacy from them, took away their ability to cause harm by subjecting others to their beliefs. She even vandalized their divine crucible by splitting it in two, peeling the Erdtree from the Shadow Tree, life from death. She didn't simply beat the Hornsent, she reordered the very rules of the world, pulling the rug out from under their feet in a way more audacious, comprehensive and radical than they ever could have imagined. The Gate of Divinity atop the Hornsent Tower of Bellarat was the site of Marika's ascension to godhood, as depicted in this scene from the DLC story trailer. We can see that back then the gate was alive, writhing and wriggling. Perhaps it was another attempt by the Hornsent to touch divinity, built on the still living bodies of their flayed victims. Perhaps Marika's use of the gate to achieve godhood is the betrayal that the trailer mentions. Surely some of those suffering bodies belonged to her people, or at least those who'd suffered the same fate. The gate was built on the pain of those she had set out to avenge, and yet she used their torment to empower herself and enable her new order. The entire tower is seemingly constructed from the screaming corpses of the Hornsent's victims, shaped into the stone against their will. It's a brutal visual metaphor for the ways that those in power elevate themselves by stepping on and over the downtrodden. Power is not an abstract instrument that's just held, after all. Power is only of use when it's held over another. To hold power is to perform power. It's not only the act of stepping on others, it's the ability to do so. By using this place, this monument to inequality and suffering, I think we're meant to understand that Marika was betraying the memory of her people, or at the very least using their pain as intended by those who inflicted it. The opening of the Gate of Divinity is the same shape as Marika's Great Rune, which, to me, seems to indicate that her power is an echo of the same forces that oppressed her people. Sin begets sin begets sin. The cycle continues. The birth of Marika's Golden Order hit the tower like a bomb. The writhing corpses that made up the gate were instantly incinerated, leaving crumbling, ashen facsimiles in their place. The grace of gold may be a guiding light for the tarnished, a gentle healing miracle in the shaman village, but here it became a weapon, blinding and fiery and ferocious, burning away the sin and the hubris of the Hornsent. They thought to build their tower to the heavens, their very own Babel, but a newborn god showed them their folly. The idea of something gentle, beautiful, or otherwise innocent being corrupted by war and suffering is actually all over the DLC. The divine beast that you fight in Lower Ballarat was born from a cultural tradition of the Hornsent that was turned into a weapon of war during Mesmer's crusades. Likewise, the poisoned hand is a weapon that's stitched from the skins of genocide victims. The fallout of power, trauma and war and suffering can turn beautiful things, even mundane things like faith, culture, our very bodies into deadly weapons. The immortal head of a perfect order cannot be tarnished by a humble past. Power must maintain an air of unassailability, and order must be enforced. Marika wanted to build a better world, a kinder world, a world without death or suffering or pain, but change is not cheaply bought. When Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, she didn't get rid of it altogether. I suspect she couldn't. In the base game, we learn that she hid the Rune of Death away in the sword of her half-brother Malekith as a threat to be brandished against her enemies. Just so, death itself didn't simply vanish from the world, it too was hidden away, disguised beneath the funerary veils of the Land of Shadow. All manners of death unacceptable to Marika now gather in the Land of Shadow to be suppressed by Mesmer's forever war. It is a necessary embarrassment. An important shame. Marika didn't remove death, she just took ownership of it. She decided when and how people got to die, and she thought she was doing them a kindness. She had a monopoly over this power, and felt entitled to give it to her brother, her enforcer, to use as a weapon. This reminded me of the way that the state, in real life, the state, has a monopoly over the use of physical violence through armed police forces. I've largely been presenting this story from Marika's perspective thus far. Was she not justified in seeking revenge on the Hornsent for what was done to her people? Was she not right to try and build a better world? Should she not have used the Gate of Divinity to ensure the suffering of her people wasn't in vain? In casting down her oppressors, Marika took on their mantle. She used their tools and was seduced by the allure of power and divinity just as they were. In The Lord of the Rings, the titular ring works in a similar way. It doesn't matter whether it's wielded by a pure soul, wielding it at all is the root of the corruption. It cannot achieve positive ends. Marika might have had good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with those, or so I'm told. Her Golden Order is just an echo of the Hornsent's tyranny, the same elements reshaped and remoulded. The leaders change, the underclass changes, but the relationship that both of those groups have with power remains. In the same way that inclusion in the Golden Order was strategic and political, the exclusion of the Omen and those who live in death from the light of her grace was also strategic, as well as spiteful. Marika, like the Hornsent, built her cities on the bodies of an underclass that she not only maintained, but added to as needed. Marika was a victim of the brutality of the Hornsent, and this no doubt influenced her decision to shun the Omen of her time, but she was also a ruthless and canny leader. We know that the Greater Will was largely an absentee god, and so the responsibility for her atrocities and the unjust society that she created must be borne by Marika alone. In a very propagandistic sense, the Hornsent and the Land of Shadows are living reminders of the indignity of Marika's beginnings, of the high price and the dark deeds that paved the way for the rise of the Golden Order. The ongoing ruination of the Land of Shadow and the continued oppression of the Hornsent are the price that Marika pays to bathe the lands between in her light. The forever war that Mesmer wages is the labour that enforces her unnatural order. Perhaps Marika told herself that her intentions were purely noble, that the sacrifice of the Hornsent was required to build a better world. But we must wonder at her wrath and her spite. We have to wonder whether she is now any different to that spirit at the whipping shack, sacrificing a shaman to push for a divinity that she didn't believe in. What do you think now? Did Marika deserve her fate? Let me know your thoughts on the philosophy of punishment in the comments section below. And so, the Land of Shadow is a necessary embarrassment. It is a home and a source for the constructed underclass, the place for undesirables and secrets. They live in the shadow cast by the Erdtree's brilliance. The Land of Shadow is an important shame. Marika burns it to warm the lands between by its embers, as a vigil torch to remember her lost kin by, and to have her eternal revenge on those who wronged her. Perhaps most importantly, she burns the Land of Shadow to erase her humble beginnings, to conceal the fact that her pact with the Greater Will was one of desperation, and to perform dominance over that history and the dangerous truths that it holds. Marika, as the immortal head of a perfect order, is tarnished by a humble past. Her power is not unassailable. This is evidenced by the fact that Marika assailed the previous system of power. And most importantly, her right to enforce her order is questionable. Ultimately, in spite of all the horrific things that they did, I don't think that the Hornsent were evil. I don't think that Marika was evil either, really. We see glimpses of beauty in the Hornsent's culture. The lion dance, for one. It's sad that that practice was perverted by war. We hear the Hornsent who serves Mikola talk about wreaking his revenge on Marika in much the same way that she had her vengeance on his people. Sin begets sin begets sin. I think that both the Hornsent as a culture and Marika as an individual are, in a fittingly George Martin-y kind of way, murky and complicated and morally grey. I understand them both, and I think they both did evil things because they were afforded the power to do so. I think what Shadow of the Erdtree wants us to understand about power is that it enables people to indulge their worst impulses and to impose their will upon the unwilling. Marika's order, for all its distinctions and gilding, for all her good intentions, is functionally the same as the culture of the Hornsent. It's dependent upon oppression, upon dehumanization, on keeping one group in the shadows to benefit those who the powerful allow to stand in the light. The power to impose an order on others is the problem. The Shadow Tree and all it represents, chaos, death, suffering, war, genocide, oppression, these things are all each the shadow of the Erdtree, the necessary flip side of the Golden Order. Bellarat Tower may have Bonny Village, but Leyndell has its shunning grounds. Marika wanted to overthrow and overshadow a cruel world by panning the good parts of life like golden nuggets from a riverbed, and building a new order from those alone. Pain and death remain in the silt. The cost of Marika's kind future, her good world, is a worse one left in her wake. And this is the tragedy of Marika for me, and it's the reason that, even with all that we've learned about her sins from the DLC, she's still my favourite character. Like, my god, she's so good. She's almost all-powerful, but impotent. She's proud, imperious, capable, but at the same time crippled by shame. She's vulnerable and naive. I hate her, and yet I grieve her losses. I understand the anguish she must have felt when she bore 2 Omen children. How violated she must have felt to be reminded of those who took from her so much in such an intimate way. And yet I think the way that she treated Morgott and Mog was unforgivable. I imagine her horror and her grief at the death of Godwyn, her first perfect son. To quote Cersei Lannister, "What good is power if we can't protect the ones we love?" Marika is, in my opinion, one of the all-time great video game characters. She's layered and complex and tragic, And it's remarkable how little of that depth is conveyed through From Software's famous item descriptions. We instead see where she came from, and then what she built. We tread through the leaves that fell in her wake. We hear about her from her family, we see how she was worshipped. We pick our way through the ruins of the civilization that she grew. We walk her path from that quiet meadow, from the unassuming and resilient sapling keeping watch over her past, all the way to the heart of the Erdtree, where she's no longer really herself anymore. We walk with her on a journey of loss, of being hollowed out by the pursuit of power until all you are is a vessel, your actions bearing your legacy out into time. Next time on the channel, I'm going to be talking about one of Marika's children who attempted to undertake a similar journey. Miquella the Kind wanted to synthesize the kind of dehumanization that he saw as the road to power, as opposed to a necessary side effect of holding it. Miquella grew up towards the end of Marika's reign, when she was at her wit's end. The most powerful figure in Miquella's life was a distant and disengaged mother, and so next time I'll be talking about how Miquella sought that same distance from the world that he hoped to rule. Be sure to subscribe and ding the bell to be notified once that drops, if YouTube decides to work, for a change. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. It took a really long time. I'd also just quickly like to say a big thank you to all the new subscribers who've joined in the last couple of months. Hearing your kind words on that old Marika video has been a wonderful experience, and I'm really, truly touched that so many of you have enjoyed it. See you next time, logheads. Bye for now. Oh, shit, yeah, if you're new, I call my subscribers logheads, by the way. Fuck. I probably should have opened with that.